Good afternoon. This is the Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer Program. The acronym for the program is CREE, C-R-E-E. And that has been my handle for about 10 years. It is today as well. The date is April 27th, 2019. And this is the first of two live streams that will occur today. This one I don't have a moderator for, and it's just as well because my tech moderator and colleague in the work that we're doing is male, and it might not really be appropriate for him to be moderating, and so I have turned off live chat because I'm still not able to multitask and really pay attention to the live chat when I'm really focused on the content and have several sources. So anxious to read your comments in the comments section, not the live chat, but I'm anxious, I'll be looking forward to reading them in as it uploads. And so the subject today is going to be that not again. 1 second. So the subject today is going to be that the dress code for parents at that Houston high school. It was astonishing, and I actually just a little bit astonished myself, because my first encounter with it was just in my news feed on Facebook, and someone had posted how ridiculous it was to have to actually explicitly write out what is appropriate attire for parents of students. That if we've gotten to the point where that actually has to be said, what a sad state that we're in, that you have to be told not to wear shower caps and rollers to your child's school or out of the house. And my first reaction really was, yeah, I agreed with that. But then as I read further, I found out there was more to it. It wasn't just about shower caps and bonnets. It was pretty comprehensive, and I really had a problem with. And I was very happy to see that so many people did clap back, and that we had progressed much further in terms of the policing of black women's bodies as compared to 10 years ago. A lot of progress has been made. 10 years ago, I did a Blog Talk Radio segment. I think it was the second one I ever did, and it was with an erotica writer, an erotica blogger and writer by the name of Scotty Lowe. You can check it out. It's in my archives on archive.org and also on Blog Talk Radio and a lot of venues. I mean, if you just Google it, you'll probably find it 6 or 7 places. But I remember Scotty Lowe talking about her reasons for being an erotica blogger for black women specifically, but also for the enjoyment of black men. And she was talking about the inability of black women to present ourselves and to be recognized as the full breadth and depth and context of our humanness in the female form. That we were really stuck between choosing two extremes, so that black women are over sexualized in an animalistic way. What we talked about 10 years ago, there has now been what we would call academic research that we really wouldn't have needed, but now there's academic research to support it, that the representations of black women are of two kinds. So the one is just these predatory sexual beasts. So the darker a woman is in media, the more likely she is to be in a state of undress. The less clothes she'll be wearing, the more skin she'll be showing. And it is also true that when we are clothed in media portrayals, we are more likely to be wearing, far more likely to be wearing animal prints of predatory animals, leopard prints, that type of thing, tiger stripes, and so that our sexuality is taken out of the context of our humanity. And I understand what the reason is for that. I mean, I understand. It's been 10 years, so we've all progressed, we've all evolved, right? So there's that, and if you don't want to be perceived as that, right? If you don't want to be perceived as that, even when just wearing regular clothing that all women wear, but when we wear it, there's a whole lot more attention to it, and the reason for it is probably what you can see in this thumbnail here. A much larger percentage of Black women, in whatever we're wearing, unless we're completely tinted, have a much more sexually attractive body than other women. That's just the way it is. I'm sorry. Now, that certainly isn't true for all Black women. And it's not true for all Black women, just a much larger percentage. So there's going to be more attention. Now, I'm going to discuss that before I discuss the other extreme that Black women are forced to choose from in order to not be perceived as these beasts, right? Now, Neely Fuller Jr., the author that I reference a lot, had said in his first work that sex comes second only to racism in its power to affect the behaviors and social political arrangement of people. And that doesn't mean that the actual act of sex, but all the things that surround it, the potential to have it, the potential to draw attention for that. Now, before there were, well, that being the case, and from everything that I can see, it is the case. I don't think too many people would argue with it being either number one or number two. We need to realize that in any transaction, in any situation between two people, whatever the transaction is, it could be buying a car, buying a house, continuing a friendship, watching a movie, whatever it is. But if we're but of course it is also the case for sex. The person who has the least urgency, the least interest in completing that transaction has the most power. The person who's most interested has the least power. So that we know, just if you want to push me to prove this in the next broadcast or the next few broadcasts, certainly I can. I don't think very many people will want to do that. I mean, we know scientifically, and we know from our own lives that men think about sex and are motivated by sex much more than women. Men think about sex something like by a factor of 10 or 20 times more than women. Not that women are not sexual. We enjoy sex, but we just aren't we don't have the urgency for it as do men. Okay? So, and when you can garner sexual attention, and sometimes that just means being looked at, or if there is the prospect of getting sex, you can, because you have more power, you can ask for and get many things. You might be able to get your way on policy setting. You might, inside your home, outside of your home, you might be able to get material goods. It's a lot of power. Now, the reason that women have less interest in sex is simply because we have a greater, in every species, the gender that has more of an investment in offspring is more discriminating, choosier, pickier, less likely, less apt to engage in sex because it's costly. So whereas men have an almost infinite, it's not infinite, but an almost unlimited capacity to parent offspring, women's window is much shorter. And for the longest period in history, our lives were at risk in doing so. For the longest time, childbirth was number one or number two for cause of death for Homo sapien females, for women. So women have a much greater investment. So biologically, we're just choosier. But a woman, almost no matter what she looks like, if she goes and stands on a corner and all she wants is sex, that's it, just sex. It won't take long, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, she'll have a taker. That can't be said for a man, no matter how fine he is, no matter how good looking he is. You know, now even if he has things, it's still going to take a while. There are women who are just about getting the bling, and if he's got a lot of money, and he's a really good looking man, and he's got whatever that sex appeal is, and he stands on a corner, probably still going to take him longer than 20 to 30 minutes to get a taker. It's just a huge difference. Okay. There was a man I used to talk with somewhat frequently, and he used to say to me all the time, he used to say, Cree, if women understood how much fear they inspire in men, how afraid of women most men are, they could have so much power. They could have almost anything they wanted. Now, a lot of men would like to call him a simp, but I think he was telling the truth, because men are afraid of rejection. Now, you have a small minority of men who get their way because they've just got whatever that sexual appeal is, and we have a system now. It's a combined system that can be encapsulated in that word misogynoir, that is a combination of racism and sexism that takes that power away from black women, so that there's now this surplus of black men who would meet the just normal requirements of a woman, you know, to be reasonably attractive and to have a reasonable ability to provide and protect. Okay, so now there's a surplus, but that is a product of racism and sexism put together, and is the reason that I have concluded that it is the black woman who is the primary target of racism. And let me explain. So we know that the various kinds of people in the world, some people would call them races, are, and if you're going to push me on this, I'll explain this later too. We know that they are either what we call Euro white people, or they are a sort of fixed hybrid between Euro white people and the black type. So there's the two main races, black and non-black. Okay. Now before, and so we know that group of people that we call Euro Americans or Euros, white people, we know they've only been around about 6 to 8, maybe 10,000 years max. And we know that the Homo sapien species, we now know that it's even longer than we thought 5 years ago. So we know that we're hundreds of thousands of years old. So for hundreds of thousands of years, there were only different types of black people on the planet. And so you had male and female. And you know, under those conditions, as I've explained in terms of the negotiation of who had the power, women had power. We had that power because we were less interested in sex, and sex is the primary, reproduction is the prime directive of biological life. So we had power. In addition to that power that we had, in that we're more selective, and that we're far less interested at any given time in sex. We also have the power that comes from being the primary caregiver to infants and toddlers, and that sticks in the mind of males as they progress from being young children into adult men, adults, right? And so this is the reason why you have electronic voices like Siri, or you have warning system voices coming on in the cockpit. So much sexual entendre in language, and that's for a reason. It's because sex is so important. But in the cockpit of airplanes, if there's a really serious problem that the pilot or the navigator and the crew needs to pay attention to in terms of the safety of the aircraft, a voice will come on, and it will always be a female, because a female will let those men know, who are usually men, this is a very serious problem. Because if it's a man, he may feel at a very subconscious level, it may feel like competition that he just dismisses. But if you hear a woman, it almost sounds like Mother Nature. This is very serious. We need your attention. Pay attention and get your senses acute and fix this problem. So you've got those two types of power that women have always had. So if you go back 150, 200,000 years ago, wherever that was, just because of those biological imperatives, women had far more power than men. But there is this law that Neely Fuller talks about, and he says it is the law of laws. It is called the law of compensation. And that is to say that everything that gets done is compensating for something. So for instance, speech. I'm talking to you right now. That is a compensation for the fact that you cannot know what I am thinking that I want to communicate with you unless I do speak. Writing is a way to compensate for the fact that I might need you to know what I said, or recording of any type. We might need to want someone to know what was said at an earlier time, or somebody might want to know what we said. And so we record it in some fashion. Everything is a compensation. So back to this issue of the imbalance of power between the two genders, evolutionarily, I'm sure this has been something that we have been negotiating. Male and female, black men and black women, have been negotiating the power relationship, I'm sure, for at least tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of years. So the reaction to this imbalance of power, because you got 50% of the population, it's not a good idea to have one group subservient to the other. In either way, whether we're talking about women having most of the power hundreds of thousands of years ago, or the compensatory system of what is called sexism or patriarchy, to contend with that. So now you've got to be attached to a man. You've got to be legitimized. You got to have power. And then that's going to be enforced by his superior muscle, and he's motivated to have weapons and so on. And so now what women want is to have that label of being married and being attached to a man. That's what gives you power. That is a compensation for the natural power that women just have biologically. And men have enforced that in a very effective way. It has really compensated. Okay, now on top of that, there are some universals that have to do with attractiveness. So there are two types of beauty. Okay, we're talking about women here. And this is related to the Houston parent dress code, but just give me some time to develop it. There are two types of beauty. There is the evolutionary beauty that we've been talking about, which is that a woman looks fertile. And the keys to fertile, generally, you can see it across the planet with a few exceptions, because the human brain is very plastic. So you're going to see some outliers, and you're going to see the ability of frames of reference or beauty systems that have been constructed to compete against the natural advantage of certain women. I'm going to say black women, okay? But there are two types of beauty. So there is the evolutionary beauty, which, like I said, gives signals of fertility. And that generally is shown in an hourglass figure, okay? A small waist, a very small waist to hip ratio. So that is evolutionary, and you can find that all over the world, regardless of size. That ratio, it almost size doesn't matter. It's that ratio, it's that hourglass that makes the pupils, they've tested this, it makes the pupils of men dilate. Okay. Now, but it is also true that to have that hourglass figure, that shape can occur in very slender women, but it is less likely. It happens, but in order to get that geometric configuration, it's much more common to see it on a woman of a certain size. Say the almost, she's black, she's maybe a little bit racially ambiguous, so we haven't scored her, but that's not an atypical body shape for black women, particularly to American women, black women in the United States and in the Americas generally. That's not an atypical shape, and to get that hourglass shape, it's much more likely to be found in a woman of a certain size. She's a very small waist, but in order to see it, to see the pronounced curve, you almost need it to be a certain size. Beneath a certain size, it's quite difficult to see that size. Now, usually with a very few exceptions. And so I'm going to go to the article to talk about, and then I'm going to switch back to this pic. But I mean, I have the caption above the picture that says, "Who wears it better?" These two young women are dressed almost identically, but one is going to garner far more oogling and ogling and sexual attention than the other. The young woman on the right, the white woman, could wear those Daisy Dukes, and not much attention would be given to her. Now, let's forget about the young woman on the right, the black woman with the clearly hourglass figure, and let's just talk about non-black women. Okay, so if you look at the woman on the right, okay, and compare her to, say, I don't know, let's compare her to the way Jennifer Lawrence looked in the Hunger Games in her bodysuit, or let's compare her to J-Lo in her youth, or even really now. See, when it's non-black women and they're very voluptuous looking, they're very curvaceous, they have the hourglass figure, nobody animalizes it. No, there's no need to make a dress code and tell them they can't, because as the articles that pushed back against this dress code was talking about, white mothers can show up at school in very tight yoga pants, and now they, with the whole CrossFit movement, they've moved away from the you can't be too thin, you can't be too thin standard, because now they understand that they can get in the gym, they can thicken their thighs and wear very tight things, that they can give an optical illusion of having a behind that is rounder than it actually is. Okay. And when they have it, when they've got the curves going on, everybody goes crazy with it and they say, "You go, girl." They aren't animalized by it, and they don't need to, and no dress codes are coming down to tell those mothers that they can't wear that stuff to drop their children off or to come into the office. That's not done. That's only done for black women, okay? Because because of the competition, they wanted, the racism can be used to take away the power advantage that black women would have otherwise. If we went back, if there were not the systems of racism and quote-unquote patriarchy on this planet, who would have the most power to do anything on this planet? Black women. So you have those systems in place to keep that from being the case. But when it's just them, they don't have any problem with it. But when it becomes a black woman, now all of a sudden it's a problem, and so you use the system of racism to take away her human power, because you say she doesn't have power, because what she really is an animal, okay? And this overly sexualized beast. So what Scotty Lowe was saying to me in my blog talk radio program 10 years ago is that black women can just be wearing regular clothing, the same clothing other women wear. It doesn't even have to be Daisy Dukes, but so many black women have that baboon figure that they can just be wearing ordinary attire and garner a lot of sexual attention. And if you don't want to be seen as this seductress, this predatory sexual animal, then your only alternative, because you can just be wearing regular clothing, your only other alternative is to go to the opposite extreme and just tint yourself, take away all of your sexual appeal, and be this sort of sexless nun type creature. So there's nothing in between, there's no nuance. And so Scotty Lowe had said that is why she started being an erotica blogger. No, and she did some other things too that you might find interesting if you go check that out. But yeah, this is what it's all about, is to take away the power that black women would have because of the sexual appeal. It's that bottom line. Okay, so let's look at the things that the Houston dress code, I think it was Madison High School, decided to enforce. To do that, I have to go to my screen capture. Not my scream capture. You don't want to hear me screaming. My screen capture, display capture. And I'm going to just take off this thumbnail contrasting these two women for right now. And go to this, and make sure that everything is showing here. Oh, it's still here. Okay, thumbnail. Why is that still there? Oh, I know why. Okay. And we go here. So this is the New York Times, as you can see, and it was written April 24th. That's how it's entitled. The Houston High School has a new dress code for parents. And if you follow my cursor here, in fact, I'll highlight it. So it's a high school, James Madison High School, a public high school of about 1,600 students in Houston, notified families this month of a sweeping policy that banned revealing and sagging clothing for all people visiting the school. Now, really the only part of the dress code that addresses fathers or male caregivers is the sagging. Now, you could say sagging is the same thing as revealing, but obviously there is a difference. If there weren't a difference, they wouldn't have used the two separate words of sagging and revealing. Now, when a man has his pants down so low that he's wearing, say, briefs, that you can see clearly the outline of his butt crack, that's revealing. I think that's going too far. We don't live in a society where we don't wear clothes, and clothes are a signal to sexuality. And there is an appropriate time for that, an inappropriate time when you're being, overly with it, over with it. In other words, if you were to ask me, is it inappropriate for a woman to wear a thong bikini, and some stiletto heels to drop her child off, I'd say yes. But we're not talking about going to those extremes. Okay, and so other than the sagging clothing, this entire thing is targeted towards black women, nobody else, not black men, and certainly not non-black women. So they want to ban revealing and sagging clothing. They want to ban pajamas. Now that is a problem that I will deal with in a second, but I want to deal with the sexual part first. They want to ban hair rollers. That is somewhat of a problem, but I want to deal with that separately as well. The whole hair thing, the hair rollers and the satin caps and the bonnets. See, that's you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And so just like with the clothing, where you have the choice between being, a sexually predatory animal or a cloistered nun who has no appeal whatsoever, you're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't in that. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't in terms of hair issues with black women. So it says that these things are worn by black women to protect their hair. Well, okay, again, here we have the system of racism. Now, black people's hair typically is far, far, far different. That's why it is rated as the heaviest single physical feature in the Cree tool in terms of measuring who's black, who's not. Our hair is quite different, and if we're trying to get it to look like some approximation, it's some reasonable approximation of non-black people's hair, there's a lot that goes with that. And life is very busy for everybody, for single people even, but especially if you've got children, okay? And especially if you are parenting them without a partner. So, as we know, Black women get judged very heavily on our hair, and so if you're trying to show up in the world, whether it's to attract a partner, or whether it's to show up at a job and keep your job, or to get a job, or just to show up in the world generally and be treated well, a lot of the Black women hair is not almost everything, but it's almost a lifestyle. It's so key. There's so much you have to do. And so you've got all these things to do, and you may fall into a period of time where you do have to drop your child off, because in order to keep that hair, it's a very unnatural thing we have to do. It's a whole very time intensive operation that we're forced under in the system of anti-Blackness, because we're so different. So yes, you have to protect it. Once you get it the way that is acceptable, you think, to people, yeah, you got to protect it. You got to protect it with satin bonnets or maybe hair rollers, because it's got, those rollers have to stay in for a certain period of time, and maybe you didn't get to bed until a certain period of time, and you only have so much time to get ready for work or whatever you have to do after that. And so they may be in your hair. Yeah, or even African, head wraps. But if you do that, now you're criticized and ridiculed for that. You're going to be criticized and ridiculed if you don't have your hair, if you don't show up to the world in more important places in your mind, if you don't have your hair in that kind of shape, and you necessarily don't have the time to have it. You don't have on staff. Black women have a net worth of $5. We're not all celebrities. We don't have on staff somebody to coif our hair before we leave the house every day. So we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. Okay? If you accept that you have to comb your hair, I'm not one of those people, but if you do, yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. Okay, so that has to do with the hair and the body type. But when you say, well, but Cree, come on now, shower caps, pajamas, that is unnecessary. Well, I agree. I mean, unnecessary is not the right word, and I'm going to tell you why. But inappropriate, yes. It is inappropriate, because when you're talking about wearing pajamas out of the house, this speaks to a level of cleanliness. Because if someone sees a person in pajamas out of the house, of course the first thing we're wondering is, did you just roll out of bed and just put the keys in the ignition? Did you not even bother to do normal hygiene? This speaks to a level of cleanliness that you have to worry about. So pajamas, yes, inappropriate. Shower caps, yeah, inappropriate. Absolutely. A robe, inappropriate. Got it. But see, when I see that, what I would hope that especially we as Black women would do is not to go to scathing ridicule. And here's why. It is a very, very, very stressful, difficult, oppressive thing to be a Black person and to be a Black woman. It's a lot of work just to get up and show up every day. There is a study that I have on my hard drive that's called it's a study that shows the relationship of what's called allostatic load and what's called physiological dysregulation. And all that means is how much stress you undergo has an effect on your physiological systems that maintain all kinds of things. To maintain your proper body temperature, metabolic rate, sugar rates, all kinds of stuff, heart rates, the whole parasympathetic nervous system. And so when you get too much stress, that stuff gets dysregulated. Your body is thrown out of whack, and so you experience illness. And if you don't experience illness, or you're not experiencing illness at the current time because of all of the stress that Black people are under, and every study shows, oh, big surprise, Black people are under far more allostatic, what's called allostatic load than anybody else. So if you're not experiencing physical illness at that point, it's unrealistic to expect that at some point it's not going to come out emotionally or behaviorally. Depression. So when I see a Black woman leaving the house in that state, everybody likes to be looked at properly. Everybody likes to fit in and not be looked down upon. If I see a Black woman who has shown up outside of her house in pajamas and slippers, or a plastic bag on her head, or rollers, I feel empathy, because I feel like these are symptoms of maybe subclinical depression or full-on depression. And I know what depression is like because I've experienced it. So rather than us having these scathing attacks on them, yeah, I wish sis wasn't in such a situation that she was leaving the house like that. But I have empathy for it. And nobody has empathy for us. They have empathy for all these white people or non-Black people in Kentucky and Virginia who are dying of opioid epidemics, which has a relationship to the next thing I want to talk about in relationship to this story. That the only people whose life expectancy decreased the last time they measured it a couple of years ago were white women, because they're drinking themselves. They have these binge drinking. They're drinking so much, and they're taking opioid medications. And there's all this sympathy for them because of these stressors, and they're in a battle locked in with their men too, because there's just always been this negotiation between men and women for power. And right now, it's pretty hostile across the races, actually. I think probably least amongst Hispanics. I mean, what I do know is that white men and white women are kind of locked in a battle for power, where women now have more agency. And, I'm not feeling sorry for them. I'm just trying to explain what I think in sort of an objective, sort of scientific perspective, what that situation is. And what they're undergoing has nothing to do. It's because it doesn't even come close. It's not in the same galaxy. It's not even almost in the same universe as the stress that Black women are under. But just that has them, on opioids and drinking themselves. And everybody's got sympathy for them. Okay? And the poor ones in West Virginia and Kentucky, if they show up and with bony behinds, or maybe they've padded them with something, but in yoga pants, nobody's trying to police that. Nobody's trying to do a dress code on them. And if they show up with their stringy hair that either hasn't been washed or hasn't been dried, and maybe it hasn't been groomed in some time, there's no policing of that. But everybody wants to police Black women. Everybody's trying to disarm us of our power. That's what that is. And I'm not here for it. I'm not here for it at all. And I'm not here for the scathing attacks. If I had a friend that was showing up like that, I'm going to know something's wrong, and I'm going to talk to her, and I'm going to see how I can help if I can, if I'm not under too much stress my own self. Okay? And yes, I understand the things that Chrissy is saying is that somehow we have to compensate for that. We just can't give into it. And I get it. If we can do it, we should. But that is the female version of the John Henry syndrome. We just can never get anything wrong, ever. There's no room for error for us, ever. We have to be perfect at all times. Perfect. 10 times is good. So we can be under 20 times as much stress, but we've got to put in 4 times as much work in our parents. That's just not realistic, and it's inhumane. I'm bordering on savage, the cruelty. And like I said, I'm just not here for it. So that's article number 1. Let me pull up a second article here to buttress what I've been saying. So this is an interesting article here on the publication, the online publication called Independent. And the title is Men, Women, and the Secrets of Skin Color. And then it's subtitled, For Him, the Female Idea is Fair, which is supposed to be a synonym for light. I'm not, we got to get over that. So when I see the word fair, I'm going to replace it by light. For him, the female ideal is light complexioned and pure, but for her, it's the wild, dark Heathcliff types who attract. And that's a reference to an old love story called Wuthering Heights. And I'm just trying to get to the sort of rationalizations for the way Black women, of typical skin hue, brown and dark, are treated. But it's got to be read in the context of this story of how darker skinned non-Black women are treated. Okay. But of course, there's a minor reference to Black women here. Okay, so I'm gonna sort of summarize and then just get right to the one part. It is absolutely true. It's a biological truth that, in general, women are a bit lighter skinned than men across the races. And surprisingly, that's more true for non-Black people than it is for Black people. They say for white women, but that could entail just about it, Spanish people, whatever, Greeks. I'm not sure from reading this article exactly where the white people were drawn from, where they said that the difference in light reflectance is 17% for white people and only 11% for Black people. So it's a truth that in general, females are lighter skinned than males, just a bit. But not enough to account for everything that we see across media. And this article even talks about that. And before I even get to the part where the article talks about it, let's just take, for example, height. It is a truth that men are generally taller than women. Put it the other way, women are shorter than men. But does that mean that the shorter the woman, the more attractive she is? Is it generally true that men are attracted to women who are 4'8" and shorter, even if they are regularly proportioned people? No, it's an absurdity. The degree to which that it has gone is far beyond anything that can be explained biologically, which this article points out. Okay, so getting to that. And so I'm going to highlight the part with my cursor that underscores that. So here's a quote by one of the study authors, and it says, "What the research shows is that our aesthetic preferences operate to reflect moral preferences. Within our culture, we have a set of ideals about how women should look and behave. Lightness and darkness have particular meanings attached to them, and we subconsciously relate those moral preferences to women," said Dr. Hyun Bauman. And, his affiliations or her affiliations are given. Next paragraph, which I will now highlight. The researchers say many judgments about beauty are made at a conscious level, such as about height, weight, leg length, and the shape of the nose and the mouth. Quote, "In contrast, other physical attractiveness ideals, including complexion, are made at the subconscious level," they say. Moving on. When they analyzed adverts featuring white women only, they found that women with the darkest complexions were more likely to be in an advanced state of undress. They were also more likely to have a bared midriff, and only they are shown with bared feet or are implied to be totally nude. And this is what we find with black women. We find we can't get any attention. We can't get any sort of refined romantic attention. We can't get that political beauty that is attached to being the counterpart of the most powerful males, non-black males, white males. You know, that's political beauty. And so the attention we get comes from just pure raw sexual. So this is why if you want attention, this is what Scotty was saying, you got to show everything. You got to be overly sexual. And you may not even be wanting to have sex. You just want some attention. Okay, you're not advertising for sex. But you'll see these other women doing it. And it's what we're left with. And otherwise, we're just this cloistered, tinted woman who has no sex appeal whatsoever. Going on. The darkest complexion women in this group are also likely to be provocatively dressed, wearing underwear or similar clothing. Women with the lightest complexion are more likely to be conservatively dressed and portrayed as friendly, happy, and honest. Now, here's the part that underscores the political aspect of beauty that is competing with the evolutionary aspect of feminine beauty. The researchers say that the scale of the differences between male and female skin color selected for their attractiveness is too big to be explained by pure biology. I'm going to read that sentence again. The scale of differences between male and female skin color selected for their attractiveness is too big to be explained by pure biology. And then he quotes and says, I contend the complexion findings should be understood as a product of deeply rooted and enduring cultural values. In other words, a political system that is set up to advantage non-black women. In this country, we're talking about white women from the days of slavery over black women. Okay? Those slave owners weren't down there in the shack every chance they got as soon as the sun went down for no reason. Yes, they had access to female bodies with no repercussions, but there's a reason for that. Now his argument is ridiculous. So before I get to his argument as to why some men prefer darker skinned women, let me talk about a ridiculous argument that is parallel that applies to black men. So it's known that a very large percentage of non-black men, particularly, I'm not going to say particularly, but they usually say white men, experience what is called a failure of the mental status test. In other words, they happen to be in some environment, maybe they're standing behind the counter in an office or in Starbucks, whatever, and there aren't any black men, and a black man walks in, and if you were to administer for the first 15 minutes after that black man walks out of the doors, that non-black man won't be able to do very basic things like be able to repeat numbers, a series of 4 numbers backwards, or to remember 20 seconds later whether or not he was shown a pentagram, a star, or a rectangle. A normally intelligent person, but their amygdala gets activated because they've had an encounter with a black man. Okay, and the way that the scientific literature tries to explain that is they say, oh well, what's happening is that white man was experiencing quote unquote stereotype threat. He's afraid that he's going to be perceived as racist, and so that is what stalls out his mental functioning. And that is absurd. That is not what is happening there. What is happening is he is experiencing at what we call the primitive brain level of a threat of dominance, black male virility and dominance. That's what's happening. It's not because he's afraid he's going to be judged as racist. That's not what's going on. So that's the parallel for men. Now for women, he goes on to say that there are 2 different preferences. So, supposedly, men like these light complexioned, regardless of the race, because she seems more honest and happy and outgoing and so on. And that's the preference. And that I'll just read that paragraph because I think it says it better than what I'm getting ready to say. Physical lightness and darkness are aesthetic characteristics that exemplify the link between aesthetic and moral judgments. It's just being a black woman, you have a moral judgment of being, you know, all dishonest, promiscuous. On average, I'm sorry, I did that. On average, light complexions in women are the dominant aesthetic ideal because sexual modesty and conventional femininity are the dominant behavioral ideal for women. So that's the establishment of patriarchy, right? So that even though women have less interest in sex, I mean, we do have some interest in sex. And when we do have interest in sex, we have power. We have the power, right? If you didn't have political systems in place, right? So that, you know, that's why a woman can say, okay, yeah, well, yeah, I'm standing here in the court. You would like sex? And it doesn't have to play out that day. It can play out over weeks or months or, you know, maybe even a couple years. The prospect of having sex. And in the prospect of having sex, well, I would like this. I would like this behavior. I would like you to work with me on this. I would like, you know, it can be done soft, very soft pedal. It doesn't have to be harsh, you know. This has been the deal. This has been what marriage has been about. This is what relationships are about for thousands of years. You know, I would like this. I would like X number of children, or I would like this kind of house. I would like this car. I would like, you know, I would like enough money for me to be able to get this done or that done. I would like help with this. I would like you to paint this. I would like you to fix this. You know, so it's power. Yeah. Now, how this fits in, I'm trying to figure out how this fits into the paragraph. I think I got off on a tangent before I was supposed to. But, that's so the dominant ideal is that men don't want that. They don't want women to have that kind of power. So the patriarchy is in effect. When a woman does want sex, you don't want her to have the power to have all the things that go around having the power in that transaction because she has less urgency about having sex. So the enforced ideal of femininity is that a woman not grab hold of that power, to make no demands, to just based on that sort of biological power, to just take whatever comes and not to trade on that sexual power. That is what is enforced as the ideal femininity. Some people call that submissiveness. You know, and submissiveness and femininity are two different things, to a large extent. There's certain things women just aren't interested in doing. I mean, but I don't know if not wanting to fight, not wanting to be physical, I don't know if that's submissiveness. That's submissiveness and aggression. I don't think those are opposites. I think those are like in two different continuums. Those are two different qualities. They aren't opposites of one another. They're just two different things. Aggression and power can be two different things. Okay, you can have a lot of power and not have to say anything. If you got a lot of power, a lot of times you don't have to say anything. All you have to do is raise your eyebrow, because you have power simply because you have something that the other person wants more than you want to give it, and you have the power to withhold it or to give it. That's power. So light skin is supposedly associated with that. Now, why is that? Well, let's go on to this next sentence here, which I will highlight by itself. However, there also exists an appreciation for a darker complexion in women, though less common. And this less common aesthetic preference appears to coexist with a view of such women as more overtly sexual. Darker women are seen as more promiscuous. That's a projection. This is why I entitled the stream, projecting vulgarity onto Black women's bodies. In other words, if we excite men of all races as a collective, generally, more than other women. We excite them sexually. They want to project the way that white men used to rape black women, or still do. But I mean, not just, we're talking about during chattel slavery and Jim Crow. And it was always the black woman's fault because she was promiscuous. She preyed on the slave master. Can you believe that? Or she preyed on the white man in Jim Crow. He was helpless to resist her advances. No, the fact is that hourglass figure had him helpless. I mean, well, I'm not going to say he's not helpless because he was a white man, but he found her very sexually appealing. Now, by definition, what is beautiful, what is sexually beautiful, what is beautiful to a man is what is sexually attractive, what looks fertile. That's the definition of it in an evolutionary sense. If we didn't have these competing systems of patriarchy and racism, but that's the very definition of what is beautiful is sexual attraction. Okay. And some of that is in the face because balanced features confer two healthy healthy sets of genes, pairs of genes. But again, darker women are seen as more promiscuous. And so then there's this list of women, we're talking about non-black women, but who have this variation in lightness and darkness of their skin. The first one is this Monica Bellucci. I don't know who she is, but apparently she's some swarthy looking non-black woman. And so it says men who favor darker hue beauty such as Italian, she's Italian, as the Italian model turned to actress supposedly have a subconscious urge for danger. Okay, now this is what I was talking about. Got too small here. Let me get it bigger. This one right here. So when I was talking about the stereotype threat of the black man walking into, the office of the Starbucks, and then they explain that, he's afraid that he's going to be viewed as a racist. No, that man is experiencing virility threat. Okay, and so the ridiculousness of that model of saying that the white man is afraid he's going to be stereotyped as racist is on par with this. That because a man favors a darker skinned woman, he has an urge for danger. That is absurd. The darker skin generally goes with an hourglass figure. All of it is more sexually attractive because the darker skin is going to be less apt to skin diseases. It's going to be less apt to sunburn. Black women, for the longest time, were sought out as surrogate mothers for embryos that had the DNA of a white mother and a white father, and if not a black woman, some other darker woman, because the evidence was that black women were more successful in carrying pregnancies to term. So all these factors are going into the darker skin, the hourglass figure. All of these are signals of fertility and health, the ability to nurse a child properly. You maybe have heard of the study that women with bigger bottoms tend to have babies with higher IQs. Okay, all of these are signals of fertility and therefore sexual attractiveness or beauty. It has nothing to do with an urge for danger. This has to do with just complying with the current system of misogynoir, the combination of racism and sexism. That's all that is. And then the next one is Nicole Kidman. And she looks like an eggshell, but I will give her credit. With all that light skin, she has stayed out of the sun. And so she hasn't aged like a prune like most white women her complexion would have. And then they go on to say, there's a discussion of how the tall, dark, and handsome, and how dark can you be if you're not black? But that is the ideal for women. And yeah, I'm not gonna deny it, but but it's not really separate from the reason that darker women are considered sexually attractive. It has to do with fertility. Remember, Lothrop Stoddard in his 1921 publication, The Rising Tide Against White World Supremacy, when he got to the part where he talked about the land of the black man, because of course it didn't say black people, that's one of the things he talked about was the fecundity, the fertility of black people, male and female, right? Because our earth suits are just more appropriate. You know, our bodies are just more appropriate for the planet, having been here longer. You know, they haven't been here that long. So yeah, that had to do with that tab. I have each tab up here for a reason. Let's see why I have this other tab here. Okay, so this one is just the very first paragraph is an abstract that verifies what I told you, that black women, where, you know, when in media, are the majority of those who wear animal prints. This is to animalize our sexuality. What is this tab here for? Make sure that everything is looking the way it is supposed to. Okay, it is. So this one was written by a black female blogger, and it's just reiterating what has already been said. You know, that she's quoting a study that had come out that said that the study demonstrated that black women are implicitly associated with both animals and objects to a greater degree than white women. You know, it has already been discussed here. And then I have this tab up. This is a book that just came in the mail for me in the last 3 or 4 days. It was written by a black woman, Safia Umoja Noble. And she's talking about how search engines, Google and otherwise, are vehicles of oppression. But what's interesting is that these are the actual suggested autocompletes in a Google search. If you put in the words, at least at the time that she published the book, if you put in the words, "Why are black women so?" you can see a list of the most common completions of that inquiry. And so, you know, it's very interesting in terms of what it says, but what it's more interesting, far more interesting in, is what it does not say. So you see that the first autocomplete is angry. That's a different discussion as to whether or not we are more angry. And if we are, you know, is there a legitimate reason? But that's not the focus of this, because we're talking about the policing of black women's bodies here. You see the second one is loud again. It's beyond what I want to talk about here. Then mean. But look at that fourth one. Look at that fourth one. The fourth autocomplete is, why are black women so attractive? That's a surprise, isn't it? Nowhere in there will you see other things in there: lazy, annoying, confident, sassy. Do you see, why are black women so ugly? Do you see, why are black women so unattractive? Do you even see where it says, why are black women so fat? Not there. And do you think that fourth search term, so attractive, for it to come up number 4 like that, do you think that's black men putting that in? Given what we know scientifically are their preferences, given what we know is being said about us all over black YouTube, black Twitter, white women winning, all that stuff, black Facebook. Do you think that's black men completing that? Nah. That's non-black people putting that in. And I would say male and female. So do you see the system? The system is designed to take away that power that black women would have. These are just the basics of socio-political, biological facts. Okay? Now, it is afternoon, and I wanted to make sure I had all my wits about me, so I didn't, I just had a couple sips. But I have on my desk here, beyond my microphone, a little glass of wine, and it has a relationship to this broadcast. And it's a wine that I went to some trouble to get, because I'm not a big wine drinker. but I had a really amazing, to me, an amazing wine when I was in the LA Orange County area a couple of weeks ago. I was up there on business, and I had dinner with my father, and on several, tried to spend as much time as I could with him while I was up there. So I had dinner with my father, and on one particular occasion, he brought his wife. And I have spoken about this on Blog Talk Radio, but I mean, a lot of people don't know me from there. But yeah, I knew that I was, he took me, we went to this very, very trendy restaurant that had great reviews, high reviews, like a 4-star restaurant. Very sort of hipster, but there's some older people there too. And so while I was sitting there with his white wife, who likes to get in her female slights that my father never sees because he's a man, he doesn't notice them. I knew, yeah, I'm gonna need some alcohol to get through this and be civil. So when the server came, it was a female who was, I guess, like a Monica Bellucci. I couldn't tell if she was Italian or Hispanic or what have you. Rather tall, probably in her early 30s, seemingly pleasant. So when she first comes over, the server asks, can we get you started with a drink? And, yes. I'm like, hell yeah, you can get me started with a drink. And so I don't know much about wine, so I asked for her suggestions, and she said, what did you want? I wanted a red wine because white wine gives me headaches. And so I asked, I don't know much about wine, so I asked if what kind of Merlot she would suggest. She said, oh, we don't have Merlot. And, so she bends down and she shows me the different wines. And she said, well, what do you want? Do you want a really dry wine? You probably don't want anything really chunky, do you? I thought what she meant was like sangria, like, super fruity. And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, she says, well, do you want a really, really dry wine? Now, and I said, well, no, I don't want it super dry, but I don't want it super sweet either. So she recommended this blend. She brings me this blend, and it was really smooth. It was wonderful. It had a good alcohol content, so it gave me the medicine that I needed to get through that dinner. And I really, really enjoyed it. So when I got back to San Diego that weekend, I went to a particular liquor store that a friend of mine had told me many years ago was owned by a man who had a very high knowledge of wine and had given him a high education in wine. And so I remembered that he had said that, so I went to that particular liquor store and I said, look, I had this amazing wine a few days ago at a restaurant, and I'm hoping that you can suggest one that's similar. It was a red wine, and the server described it as chunky. Bear with me, there's a relationship. Now, this man knows a whole lot about wine. He scrunched up his face. He was an Arab, probably a Chaldean, and they don't consider themselves Arab. But at any rate, he said, chunky. Chunky? I've never heard that used to describe a wine. He rubs his beard for a minute, and he says, she probably meant full-bodied? Right? Voluptuous, because those are terms that are used for wine. Luxurious. See, voluptuous and full-bodied wines are considered, you can really wrap your senses around it. It fills up your senses. It's voluptuous. It's full-bodied. These are terms that are used for wine. Well, these white women that go to this trendy restaurant, so it wasn't just her. And apparently, even with the age difference, that wasn't enough for her. But I doubt that it was just her. So what it is that non-black women don't even like those terms being applied to wine. Why? Because they don't like its association with beauty, voluptuous and full-bodied, which is more likely to produce an hourglass figure, which is more sexually attractive and more likely to come in the color black. So they decided to not describe wine as voluptuous or full-bodied, which is what it's been called for I don't know how many years. And now they want to call it chunky. They never stop. And then I like that so much. So it took me about a little over a week to consume it. So I was going back for bottle number 2. And I walked into the store and he recognized me immediately. And he said, "Oh, you're back." I had the bottle with me, the empty bottle, because I wanted to get the same wine. He said, "Oh, you're back. I'm so glad you liked it." And I said, "I did. I really did. I'm going to get another bottle." He said, "Well, I suggest you get more than one more bottle because there are no more of these being made. Whatever has been made has been made." The man who was making the wine, he got out of the wine business. And then his son comes behind the counter. He says, "Yeah. This was a wine that was made by a rapper." I'm in for it now. Okay, I know what's coming. He tried to get out of here with my bottle of wine. So the younger guy, who's probably in his, I don't know, early 30s, says, "Yeah, it was made by a rapper. Yeah. He doesn't do it anymore, but I mean, he did a good job. He did a really good job. I'm sure he didn't make it himself. He didn't make it himself." Now, that is very that's wine. That's the wine business. Of course, you're going to taste it, make sure you like it. You hire people who know what they're doing. It was a great business venture. He produced an excellent wine. And, and I had asked for a high end because that's what I'd had at the restaurant. It was only $14. So you better believe I went back for another. I'm like, this is great, $14. But yeah, he had to point out that it wasn't the rapper's idea. And it turned out, so then when I got home, I did my research. And the name of the wine, if I haven't said it already, is Earl Stevens. And so he goes by his entertainment name is E40. Okay. But yeah, he had to make sure that I knew that it wasn't his idea. So that's non-black male racism towards black males. But I got my wine and got out of there. So I'm just not here for the policing. I want to take off the screencast because I want to read something and I don't necessarily want you to see that. So we'll just go back to this one. In the description, I talked about slang as it sheds some insight into this dress code at this particular school, but just the dress code in general for black women, that we're not allowed to show out because we're penalized. We're penalized for just being more beautiful. Okay. So we're either penalized by being attacked, having our humanity attacked, or we're penalized for maybe trying to compete, right, with our teenage daughters. But, maybe a woman is just wearing regular clothes and maybe she just still looks good. There are a lot of black women who still ba-boom with their figures. I'm not saying, it's the majority, but there are a lot. Now, and if it's a white woman or a non-black woman, that's not an issue, is it? Because black people did not invent that term MILF, M-I-L-F. Moms, I'd like to. Black people didn't invent that term. And that term has always been considered a compliment. If a young teenage boy found his classmate's mother so attractive that he had sexual thoughts of her, that was considered, well, she really kept herself up well. Good for her. She was never accused of trying to compete with her teenage daughter. And, 15 and 16-year-old girls are not that sexual anyway. That's something that's being projected onto 15 and 16-year-old girls, particularly black ones. The mother's, I'm sure, much more sexual, obviously, than the daughter. If she looks good, she still looks good. If you're non-black, you get points for that. If you're a black woman, it's a moral degradation. You don't know how to act. You're still out here trying to act too young. You're trying to compete with your daughter. You don't know how to dress modestly. But that's only for us. But for them, MILF is a compliment. We're the exact opposite. We're the ones who popularized the term MFer, mother effer. The idea of being sexual with a mother is insult to the nth degree. Now it's just used as regular terms, MF, because it's a noun. But the way that it started out as profanity is because it's worse than just an effer. You know, it's a mother effer. You see the extreme opposites of the pole. White people are the people who popularized this idea of older women who've still got a lot of sexual attractiveness, and it's okay for them, but not black women. And black women are much more likely. You've got 25 and 28-year-old actresses playing 50-year-old women now because they can't handle the fact that black women still look good at that age. So now they get 30-year-old women to pretend like they're the mothers of teenagers or 20-somethings so that they can compete with black women. Look at my outline and make sure that I have not let anything go that I did not want to. I think that about covers it. Let me know what you think. I'm interested to read your comments. And if you liked it, you know what to do. Thumbs up it. Please do that. I mean, if you really liked it, take the time to log in and thumb up, because that helps the message spread. And this particular broadcast should not be a surprise to you if you know what I'm about. If you read the about section, I have said that there's going to be a focus on black women and girls as well as being able to define who is black and who is not, because we cannot afford to operate at half strength. Black people cannot afford, and that means black men too, to mistreat their women in the way that, even to the extent that non-black people do, or that white men do. We can't afford it. We have a mammoth hole to dig ourselves out of, and we can't have all this morale degradation or depression due to the really unjust and cruel ways that we treat black women and girls. We need to operate close to 100% strength. You can't take out half the population and think you're going to dig your way out of the hole that we are globally. Okay? So that is the connection to countering racism and why I deal with issues that are specific to black women and black girls. So yeah, if you like, and so we're spreading both those messages, that we can't have Rachel Dolezals, we can't have $5 Negroes, and we need to shore up how we're treating each other all the way around, and as a general topic, black women and girls. And so yeah, if also subscribe. That's going to help with the algorithm. That's going to help spread the message, and hit the notification bell so you know what's happening. I'm trying to get to a point where I can say I know regularly when I'm going to be on. Have not been able to do that yet. I know the banner still says Fridays at 6 p.m. But I haven't been able to do that. I wasn't able to do it yesterday. And so the plan is today there will be a second stream, and it will be the content that we've been doing the last few programs that will be co-hosted by Kofi over at Countering Racism, Anti-Blackness, the Crab venue. And that's going to be, as I said, 4 p.m. Pacific. It will be 6 p.m. Central and 7 p.m. Eastern. And we'll be rating all males this time, athletes. And that generally takes about, from what I've seen, about a little under, a little over 30 minutes per. So I'm not sure how many we're going to get in. Either probably 3, at most 4. So we'll be rating them together. The phone lines will be up if you want to call in and help rate. And also, you know what? After we're done with the rating, if you want to call in and discuss anything that has been said by either myself or Brother Kofi on any of the YouTube broadcasts thus far, there's a protocol for that, which is, no ad hominem arguments, no personal attacks, no name calling, and try to present, if you have disagreements, try to present, your evidence or your logic with it. But if you can go back and listen to some of my BTR broadcasts, you'll see that I'm actually, I'm very courteous, and I can get kind of sharp. I've gotten a little bit sharper. I don't mean in terms of intellect, but I mean, I'm not disposed to just be pleasant, no matter how unpleasant somebody is with me. Okay. But I'm a pretty nice person to talk to, and I know Brother Kofi is too. So yeah, the phone lines will be up this afternoon, and maybe somebody will call in. Don't get too scared, and we can chop it up. Okay, let me know what you think in the comments. But for this live stream, this what is now afternoon on the West Coast, and it's still afternoon on the East Coast of the United States as well. April 27th, 2019. Signing out for now. See you in a couple of hours, or at least hear you in a couple of hours. Stay safe between now and then. Oh, wait. That was not a crisp ending, because there is actually something I want to show you. I left something out that kind of important to me. Some continuity with the last broadcast that we did on Nipsey Hussle, who took his name from Nipsey Russell, who was a very popular comedian, and he used to be a frequenter of all kinds of game shows in the 70s. And I wanted to show you a little snippet of when he was on a game show and when he did one of his rhymes. Okay, this is the guy again who Nipsey Hussle took his name from and was inspired by, because this guy was a genius with words. And the continuity is that it actually fits in with this broadcast, because it deals with sex appeal, and the contrast between these two young ladies in the thumbnail. So I'm going to play you that, and then I'm going to sign off. Okay, give me a second to set it up. Let's take off. I think we can just probably play it, but just to be sure. Nope. So I'm gonna have to take off this one. And here we go.
I am here to say.
Nope. Third time's a charm. Gotta be. Here we go.
I am here to set the record straight about sex appeal and a woman's weight. It's nice to be neat and look petite, but if you want to feel some heat, you got to have some meat.
Yeah, that was it. That was Nipsey Russell talking about what is generally necessary to have that hourglass figure. And I wish I could have extended the video, just that little snippet, a little longer, so you could see the white women's reactions as they looked at the white men. Okay, so that was fun, and I am now signing out, and I will see you in a couple of hours.